Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member, for having this hearing. And I would just echo the Ranking Member's observation that it would be good to build on this hearing by also hearing from state and local officials. I want to thank you, Secretary Wolf, for your Acting Secretary Wolf, for your testimony today. And I also hope you will pass on my thanks to the men and women who work so bravely to defend our country and make us safe. And I also want to take a moment to mourn the loss of David Patrick Underwood, the Federal Protective Service officer who was killed in the line of duty in Oakland by a member of the Boogaloo Movement. Our country is undergoing a much-needed reckoning about our history and reality of racial injustice following the killings of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. As we continue working to address longstanding inequities in our society, including in the criminal justice system, we must also conduct strong oversight of the federal government's response in recent months to the protests in places like Washington, D.C. and Portland, Oregon. That's why today's hearing is so vital. So I want to start, Mr. Wolf, with this question. The Washington Post and Politico recently reported that the DHS Office of Intelligence and Analysis compiled intelligence reports about journalists and protesters involved in the Portland protests. A second story also stated that Mr. Cuccinelli waived the requirements that DHS's intelligence office be subject to a review by DHS's internal civil rights watchdog, the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. That's extremely troubling. At the core of its mission, DHS relies on public trust and cooperation as embodied by the See Something, Say Something campaign. The American people expect that DHS's activities will be done in a manner consistent with our values, so it is extremely disappointing to hear that DHS's own internal mechanisms are being circumvented or perhaps arbitrarily discarded. As I've heard you say, the matter is being investigated by the department. Can you confirm for us, please, who is leading the investigation?
Sure. In the department, the Office of the Inspector General is performing that investigation. I will say, you mentioned two different issues, I think, that are being conflated. So if I have just a moment, I can explain the situation. So open source reporting program at DHS has been in existence since 2011. And so there were three instances that I was made aware of information being put out that also identified media or press individuals.
Yep.
As soon as I was made aware of what was occurring, I stopped the program, I stopped the practice, referred it to the IG, and again, it removed the individual in charge of that directorate.
And let me just stop you there for a minute. My time is limited, and I just want to drill down on one thing. Is the IG the only investigation going on of that issue?
Of that specific issue, yes, I believe so. We have internal. INA has also an oversight function that is also looking at that.
Okay, so then what I want to get to then is if you have another internal investigation, given his apparent involvement in the waiving of the requirement that the DHS intelligence activities comport with civil rights and civil liberties oversight, will Mr. Cuccinelli recuse himself from any matters related to that investigation?
Again, the OIG investigation is separate and apart from anything that I would be involved in, that Mr. Cuccinelli would be involved in.
But you mentioned an internal investigation somehow separate.
It was a preliminary investigation, but as soon as the IG picked up the investigation or accepted
that is now the only one.
We have stopped.
Okay.
So the IG,
all right.
Now,
so
specifically what, to go back to the CRCL question that you specifically mentioned, I think they're being a little confused here. So we have raw intelligence reporting, and then we have finished intelligence products. And what Mr. Cuccinelli did was to remove himself if there was an issue with finished intelligence reports, and there was a disagreement between CRCL and the Office of Intelligence and Analysis, it would normally come to the Deputy Secretary to resolve. What he did is he removed himself from that. We left it with the Undersecretary of Intelligence and Analysis to resolve that. CRCL plays a role with that. CRCL also plays a role regarding collection requirements of raw intelligence as well. So I think it's important to separate those things, because what we saw in Portland and the open source reporting are raw intelligent products.
All right. Well, thank you. We will follow up with you on that because I want to drill down and make sure we understand it. But it is a concerning report, and I appreciate that the IG is taking it on. I want to move on to something else. As DHS personnel work to protect federal buildings and their occupants, it's critical that they take all possible steps to try to de-escalate any confrontations, both to protect themselves and others. So I want to build a minute on Senator Portman's line of questions about what DHS could have done better. Two of your predecessors at the department, who both served under a Republican administration, have expressed concern that that wasn't what happened in Portland. De-escalation wasn't what happened. Tom Ridge, our nation's first DHS secretary and former governor of Pennsylvania, said that the way DHS officials were acting was, quote, not diffusing the situation, it exacerbated it, close quote. Similarly, former DHS Secretary Michael Chertoff recently said that DHS's forces have taken a, quote, very belligerent, aggressive tone, close quote, toward the protests, and that their actions have, quote, poured gasoline on the fire, close quote, of a situation that now threatens to undermine the public's trust in the department. Mr. Wolf, have you spoken with former Secretaries Ridge and Chertoff? Do you agree with them that DHS should seek to de-escalate tensions when in the field instead of increasing them?
I have spoken to both former Secretaries Ridge and Chertoff. I walked them through specifically what was going on in Portland. I asked, they asked a number of questions, and at the end of that conversation, they thanked me. They said they did not know all the facts,
right.
And that certainly informs their decision moving forward. Absolutely. We absolutely have to de-escalate. A lot of the training that Federal Protective Service, as well as the specific assets that we sent to Portland, are trained on de-escalation techniques. A lot of what we do, when you look at a 5-hour period every night, we are inside that federal courthouse 90 to 95% of that time. We only come out when there are fires being set, when there's enough individuals there, when there's thousands. We've seen anywhere from 500 to 5,000 individuals on that fence line. And at some point, you do have to disperse the crowd. You have to push them back because they will overrun. Right. So we do a number of tactics that actually try to de-escalate the situation.
Well, what I would appreciate, understanding that I'm just about out of time here, what I would appreciate is material from your department about the type of de-escalation training that you do. And I also, to follow up on where Senator Portman was going, would appreciate further conversation about what you've learned about what worked and didn't work. Because we've seen very disturbing video here today. There's also very disturbing video where federal authorities, are using batons on people who appear to be peaceful, right? So those are the types of things that together can escalate along with tactical decisions your forces may make. So I'd appreciate following up with you. Again, thank the professional men and women in your service for their service, and thank their families for us too. Thank you.
And just one clarification, the video that we see with the baton hitting the Navy veteran, that is not DHS law enforcement.
Well, but again, that's why coordination and clarity about what you're doing and who you are and wearing clear identification makes a difference. Thank you.
Senator Paul.